Welcome to Straight Talk. Foreign ownership of New Zealand farmland. The views are becoming increasingly polarised. The government is walking a tight wire, trying to placate Kiwis worried about selling the family silver, while keeping overseas investors happy, as they're eager to pump capital into rural areas and farmers' pockets. China's Bright Dairy and America's Harvard have the go-ahead to buy New Zealand. So what happens now? Also, what about the move to switch meat inspection duties from government employees to meat company workers? What will overseas buyers think? And they're drinking our wine over in the UK, with wine sales rocketing up, but Chile is still leading the race. How come? Today I'm joined by the Business Deputy Editor, Karyn Scherer, and National Business Review Editor, Nevil Gibson. Now, Karyn, this foreign ownership debate just seems to grow and grow. Where do you think it's going to end?
Well, it's a very good question. I don't think it's going to go away in a hurry, that's for sure. And I think certainly if Winston Peters gets his way, we'll be going on about it for quite some time, yes.
What can we expect to see from Winston? He's always full of surprises, isn't he?
Well, I think this issue is just tailor-made for Winston, isn't it? I mean, this is absolutely the kind of thing that he's been, banging on about for years, and I think he will, he's doing his very best to try and get back in there at the moment.
Right. So if there wasn't any xenophobia now, there certainly will be once he gets involved.
Absolutely. I think you can guarantee it with Winston.
What do you think, Nevil?
Well, I think sooner or later some facts will come into the debate. We've had a lot of advertising from the Save Our Farms, but when you analyse how much grazing and arable land is owned by overseas interests, it's less than 2%, which is extremely small. And there's no huge pressure from overseas buyers. I mean, Harvard you mentioned and Bright Dairy, they're pretty, Harvard's buying forests. Well, a lot of overseas interests have owned forests for a long time with nobody worrying about that. And the Bright Dairy, well, that's a little bit of a one-off because they're buying into a processing plant anyway. They're not buying farmland.
No. And there didn't seem to be any qualms about that purchase, did there, Karyn? That was seen to be because it was a processing facility, didn't have the same sort of emotional tie as farmland.
I think it is a different issue. I think that the land issue is slightly different. But I mean, Nevil makes a good point too. That I mean, the actual foreign ownership is pretty small, which is I think also an interesting factor that not many people mention when they talk about banning foreign owners will reduce the price of land. Well, there's not a huge amount of foreign owners anyway that are queuing up to buy farms. So. I think Neville's right. Yeah, we do tend to lose our perspective on this issue very easily.
Well, I think the government's obviously tried to deflect it in a way, but they've actually made it worse. I mean, the idea of the review we had, which went on for nearly 2 years, was to actually clarify it for overseas investors and make it easier, if not worse. Now it's got a political decision in there which means the government minister can veto something. Now, about the only thing that I would veto would be, say, direct ownership of land by interests in the Chinese government, because even Bright Dairy is effectively, and like all other companies in China, all effectively controlled by the Communist Party there, which of course is a big worry. But if it's Indians or Americans or Canadians or anyone else, I don't think it's the same issue, because they're largely private interests and they buy and they sell. Not everybody buys land in New Zealand, owns it forever. They often sell.
Why do you think the government stepped away from making a hard decision there? Was it just a problem they just wanted to put in the too hard basket?
Yeah, just a political thing.
They're just trying to please everybody. I mean, they're running this very tricky balancing act at the moment where, they desperately want to keep Winston out of it for obvious reasons, and they desperately don't, they don't want to let Labor or the Greens jump on the bandwagon, because they know it's a popular bandwagon, and they're just desperately trying to keep everybody happy and pleasing no one at the moment.
I don't detect there's strong pressure or opposition to overseas ownership in the farming community, and of course it opens up job opportunities for managers and people like that who can't afford the land themselves. It keeps the prices up, there's no question about that.
Yeah. Farmers are in a difficult position though, aren't they? Because they sort of do want to have a bob each way. They don't want overseas investors necessarily coming in, but if they've got a property to sell and there's no local buyer, a foreign owner is looking quite attractive to them.
It's an interesting point that if you aggregate too much farmland and the prices that go, stay high, and it costs several millions of dollars, who in New Zealand's going to be able to buy them?
You're looking at a limited level of things.
But in fact, the level that, as Nevil pointed out, the level of foreign ownership is not high. There are not a huge queue of overseas owners queuing up to buy land here. So I think that issue does get exaggerated.
Right. Yeah. What about suggestions that we've seen that the superannuation fund might be looking possibly at buying into farms? That could certainly come at a good time now, could it, Karyn?
Well, I think it's it's an interesting development. Again, I think it is about it's about the public mood more than anything I detect, and also I think that the government is really scared at the moment about the bubble bursting in the ag sector. I think they're very, very wary of that.
Right. What do you think, Neville?
Well, their annual report said they were being faced with lots of opportunities, and obviously, and they've looked at them and they don't like them because, let's face it, for outside investors like the fund, returns from owning farmland or farms is not that great.
No.
And so therefore they can make a lot more money by sticking to overseas shares, which is where nearly 3/4 of their money's gone anyway.
Karyn, what about the effect that the Save the Farms group has had? Very large full-page ads in newspapers, and they seem to be mirroring public sentiment up to a point.
Yeah, look, I think it's very interesting. I know a lot of people have rubbished the Save the Farms people. Certainly, plenty of people have. But in fact, I mean, if you actually look at it, a very smart PR guy, I think, once told me that the way you get the government to change its mind is to make them think that there's votes in it, and if they can keep stoking the fires with sort of popular public opinion, I don't think it's entirely misguided campaign myself.
Right. What do you think, Neville? You think they've got the legs to get right through to the general election next year?
Well, they're quite well. I mean, they're a certain group of people. They're people who are quite well up with investment. They've done very well for themselves, and I think they see it as a nationalistic issue. And perhaps that's really what it's all about. That New Zealand's business could be taken over by Australia. And there's a genuine fear there, and I'm not saying it's all rational, but it's a good one to press buttons on. And the fact that it's farms is even more emotional. But I think they'd like to widen the debate out a bit about making everybody involved in jobs and business in New Zealand think about, well, is this the best for the country and what isn't?
Sort of a update of the Buy New Zealand campaign.
Yeah, I think that's a valid thing to do, and it makes it less xenophobic. They say, of course, they're not xenophobic and it's not anti-Chinese, but so maybe they should emphasise that Kiwi, the pro-Kiwi view.
Yeah, that's one criticism of it. They haven't really been clear about exactly what their argument is, I think.
Do you think that's coming further down the track?
Well, I think it has to, and obviously as we get more concrete decisions around what's going to happen to the Crayford farms, the South Canterbury farms, I think obviously those issues will get a lot more. Yeah,
now you mentioned both of those issues. There are a lot of people who are just waiting for the air to clear, if you like, on those particular sales. What do you think is going to happen there?
Oh, well, I think it's pretty obvious that there's several very major bidders who are lining up for the Crayford farms. I'd be very, very surprised if Natural Dairy is among them.
Do you think Landcorp might still have another go?
I absolutely do, yes, and I think that there are other credible buyers in there as well.
Right, what do you think, Neville? There's more to be played out here.
Well, it certainly is. I can't predict the future, unfortunately, and there's a lot of, we don't know who the buyers might be, and what was it, over 150, Karyn?
Yeah, I think
which seems a lot. Yeah.
I think the information I've heard is there are a couple of fairly serious, strong contenders there, and I think they're having pretty serious discussions.
Is it a problem that once these issues are out of the way, farmers are expecting, or the community generally is expecting, that farm prices will suddenly take off again, whereas that might not be the case, Neville?
Well, one thing you can predict is that farming and agriculture all around the world is going to be a good investment in the long term. In the United States this week, incomes for farmers are predicted to go up something like 24%, and farmland's already on the rise, and virtually every commodity is also up. So if the United States agriculture is going to lead their economy out of the recession, it's going to have a big flow on to New Zealand.
Yes, and we'd like to see some of that effect here. Thanks, team. Coming up after the break, with the Aussie dollar going from strength to strength, what's the fallout for our Kiwi dollar? And the new Farm IQ initiative for our meat industry. Is this the long-awaited pasture-to-plate strategy farmers have been praying for? Stay with us. Welcome back to Straight Talk. Now it's on to You Said It. all the latest issues making the rounds in the ag media, starting with that crazy Aussie dollar. What's happening there, Neville? Parity with the US dollar being talked about.
Oh yeah, and well, it's all about the American dollar, and the American dollar is going down the chute, and it's deliberate by the Americans because that can pull their economy up because it makes exports cheaper. Every other country in the world is worried about it, and they're trying to stop it. Brazil, Switzerland even. But I haven't heard anything from Australia yet. I think parity is not really a big problem for them.
No, because their economy is pretty strong at the moment, and that would be a natural sort of progression in some ways.
I think so, and Canada's economy is also very strong, and they are at about parity as well. And so are the Swiss, you know, and this is almost unheard of, but a lot of talk about currency wars, but I don't see a lot happening in any sort of major move apart from in Japan where again the dollar's at a 15-year low.
So if we get up to 80 cents I think there's going to be a little bit more talk here about
it. There sure is.
Yeah, I suppose if we keep our deficit up the currency traders must see some reality sometimes.
Right. Yeah. So what does this mean for Kiwi exporters? Obviously a concern for them, but what can they do in terms of they're at the mercy of the currency, aren't they?
Yeah, not a lot. I mean, it's not going to plummet to 40 cents anytime soon, I don't think. And it's going to stay around the 70 to 75 mark, and you know, you have to live with it.
Yeah, just grin and bear it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, or hedge.
And some firms are very good at that, like with Fonterra, have shown that they...
And some not so good, unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, it benefits the wider community, though, because it keeps our international debt down and oil prices as well. You know, cheaper fuel is going to help everybody.
So there's benefits there as well. Yeah, right. Well, moving on. The Farmers Weekly reports Department of Conservation Director General Al Morrison. He's been questioning why New Zealand doesn't pay as much attention to its environmental deficit as its financial debt. What should we be doing, Neville? More awareness?
Oh, Al Morrison's always been keen on environment, and of course events in Europe show that, you know, pollution is still quite a big thing. I mean, most people probably it's gone off the radar a bit, but there is a tremendous problem with pollution in some parts. I think New Zealand's pretty well off.
I think one of New Zealand's problems is we spend far too much time talking about our environment instead of our financial deficit.
Right, yeah. Right. So what should we be doing in terms of
I think we're doing quite a bit of it, quite frankly.
Yeah.
You know, I think if we talked a bit more about our financial deficit, we'd do ourselves some favours, actually. But.
Right. So you don't think that Al's message is going to get a great deal of support out there in the rural community, perhaps?
Oh, I think the environmental message always gets a fair bit of support at the moment, yeah. I don't think...
I'd like to see some of his ideas about commercialising the Department of Conservation a bit, because there's things they could do where they could draw in a lot of money involving the private sector, maybe farming weka and that sort of thing.
Yes, but remember all that fuss some years back when they decided to charge hut fees in some of their huts. There was a public outcry, wasn't there?
The environment's wonderful until you actually have to pay.
Have to pay for it, yes. Right. Is it worth paying for? I guess that's the question there.
The minute it hits your pocket, people suddenly aren't so keen.
Yeah, there's a different attitude.